Welcome to Layer the Alchemist, where we discuss all things heavy metal and hard rock. On today's episode, let's discuss Def Leppard's 1983 album Pyromania. This is an album that really takes me back to the early 80s. It's almost like a time capsule in a lot of ways. It takes me right back to the 13-year-old me. At this point, I'm totally into heavy metal and hard rock. MTV has come out. Def Leppard would be all over MTV with their hits. You were hearing them on the radio. And this was really the beginning for me when heavy metal and hard rock started to really move into the mainstream. I know a lot of people say that Quiet Riot's Metal Health was the album that broke the door open for all the LA bands and that whole kind of sound. But for me, this album is really the album that does it. And yeah, I know Def Leppard is a British band. They weren't from LA. But for me, they don't sound like a British band. They sound like they could have been from that whole LA scene, that whole American sort of melodic hard rock thing. And this album actually predates Quiet Riot's Metal Health by a couple months. So this album came out before Metal Health. And I think Metal Health gets the attention because it broke into the number one slot. And Pyromania never did. But I really think that's because Michael Jackson had that number one spot with Thriller. And at least I think it was Thriller. Michael Jackson was in the number one spot, and Def Leppard wasn't able to quite knock them out. If this album had probably come out 3, 4, 5 months later, after Michael Jackson had cooled a little bit, this would have been in the number one spot, because this album was just a huge hit for them. I was reading before this video that it was at one point selling 100,000 copies a week when it was on a roll and at its peak. And it just sort of, it's a very well produced album, sort of foreshadowing where a lot of these 80s metal and hard rock bands would go, with the really big productions, really well produced, really big hits, riffs, but still really melodic and catchy. So the album features Joe Elliott on vocals, Steve Clark on guitar, Pete Willis on guitar. Now this is the third Def Leppard album. And Pete Willis was the original guitar player, and he would be fired during the recording of this album, although his rhythm guitar parts would be on all the songs on the record, and he would get writing credit on a couple songs on the album, including Photograph, probably the biggest hit off this album. Phil Collen would come in then and replace Pete Willis on guitar, Rick Savage on bass, and Rick Allen on drums. The album is produced by Mutt Lange. Now, Mutt Lange was famous in the hard rock world, for AC/DC's Highway to Hell, Back in Black, and For Those About to Rock. And he produced the album before this, High and Dry. But High and Dry for me is more in line with what he was doing with AC/DC, more straightforward, straight ahead hard rock, very well produced. But on this album, he really takes the production to a whole nother level. There are tons of layers of things going on this album. There's tons of guitars. There's keyboards. Now, I haven't mentioned, here's a little trivia for you. Who played keyboards on this album? I never knew this until I was researching it before this video. It is, believe it or not, Thomas Dolby, who's the Blinded Me with Science guy, who's listed on the record as Booker T. Bozen. I think I'm reading it right. And here's the real surprise. Tony Kaye, who was the original keyboard player for Yes and who would come back for Yes during the 90125 era. He's uncredited on this record, but apparently he played keyboards on this record. So there's actually a lot of sort of keyboard textures on here. There's no Yes style keyboards on here. It's more like sort of textural and just filling out the sound, but it really adds a depth and width and fullness to the sound on this record. The guitars sound great. It's got a really nice low end, a really nice warm sound. There's tons of vocals on it, which is a real Mutt Lange signature, big, huge background vocals. I mean, he even did that with AC/DC. I was listening to Highway to Hell earlier today, and you just hear those signature Mutt Lange background vocals, even in AC/DC. So they're all over this record also. Tons of background vocals. My only complaint might be that the album, the drum sound on this album, now, I always thought there's something going on with the drums here, and I just thought they were just heavily processed. Well, in doing my research for this, and I've seen this from more than one source, that it's actually a drum machine on here, that the bass and the snare drum were a drum machine, like an early drum machine, and the cymbals, and I think maybe some of the tom fills and stuff was actually Rick Allen, but it's really a drum machine through the whole thing, and you can kind of hear it. There's some songs in here like Rock of Ages, for instance, where like there's like a hand clap sort of in place of the snare drum, and it just sounds really robotic. So it kind of makes the album feel a little bit dated. The snare sound is really reverbed out and big sort of gated reverb type sound, although that would be the drum sound for the 80s, and this was sort of an early album to do that. So I guess it's hard to fault it a little bit, although maybe it hasn't aged quite so well. But otherwise, it's an album that, man, you could just crank it up and it just has a lot of punch to it. It's just very well mixed. I mean, everything that Mutt Lange was doing at this time, he just had a magic touch, and all his mixes just sounded fantastic. So the album, what surprised me was before I made the video, what inspired me to make the video was I was watching on YouTube. I found this movie, like a biography movie about the band Def Leppard with actors in it. Not like not like interviews and stuff like that, but like a movie about the band. And it got me thinking, and I haven't listened to this album in a really, really long time. And I was kind of thinking like, oh man, I'm going to bust this out. And I'm just not, I was just thinking I'm not really going to like it. The popular songs on here, I've heard them too many times. And I was thinking, I don't know. I just hadn't heard it in so long. I didn't know how I was going to react to it. And I got to say, I really, really enjoyed it. First of all, the popular songs on here. Let's talk about them first. Rock Rock Till You Drop, Photograph, and Rock of Ages. Photograph. Now, you would say that's a song that you've heard way too many times. But in my opinion, that is just a great, very well-written, melodic, hard rock song. I mean, everything is right in the place, and that's Mutt Lange's influence. Also of note, Mutt Lange has a writing credit on pretty much every song on the album, and he is just a master of really distilling things down to their perfect form. There's no wasted jamming or excessively long intros or outros or anything like that. Everything has a place. Everything is right where it should be. And Photograph is just a great example of that. It is just a super catchy, very, very well-written song. Rock Rock Till You Drop, kind of the same thing. I'm a little bit tired of that one. I still like hearing Photograph, though. It's just got such a great chorus. When all those background vocals kick in, man, just awesome. Again, well-written song. Rock of Ages, that's a fun one. It was one that I thought like I was going to not want to listen to, but the chorus in that is really cool, the way it kind of drops down and everything. There's one where the drums sound really dated in it. The whole drum machine sound is maybe a bit too much, but it's still fun. And then what really surprised me was how many of the other songs on this that I'd forgotten about, and realized how really cool they were, and how there was really some more sort of intense, a little bit darker sounding songs here, like Too Late for Love is kind of a moody kind of ballad thing. It's got a lot of different things going on, some cool I love the middle section in that song is really cool. Stage Fright is a good upbeat hard rocker. Foolin, that's another one that was really popular and they had a big video for. Great big chorus in that. I love the acoustic guitars in it, kind of like a melodic ballad, something that will become very popular with all the 80s rock and metal bands to follow. Die Hard the Hunter, that's another really cool one that has a real kind of minor key, heavy rock, metalish vibe to it. The album, a little bit towards the end, loses a little bit of steam, Coming Under Fire. It's kind of cool. Action Not Words is a little bit of a throwaway for me. Billy's Got a Gun, that's a cool one with a cool vibe to it. So it's a good album, and even past the big hits, the deeper cuts on this are really, really cool. And there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of interesting layers to this. There's a lot more keyboards to it than I originally remembered. When I went back to it, I really wasn't, I mean, I knew that there were some keyboards, but I thought it was just more of like an effect type of thing, like in Too Late for Love and Billy's Got a Gun and stuff. I thought it was, but I was really surprised when I was listening. There were all these nice little textures that really filled out the sound. The performances from everybody on this are great. Joe Elliott sounds great. The guitar solos on it are great. Again, it doesn't feel like an album where there's anything just kind of thrown away. I mean, there's some songs towards the end that are obvious, like they're not as big of a hit as, weren't going to be as big of a hit as Photograph, for instance, but it's still just a really well done album. It's a really fun album. It takes me right back to 1983, the early days of MTV, and all that floodgate sort of opening for this type of sound. And like I mentioned earlier, at least I think I mentioned this earlier. I can't even. I've redone this video like 2 or 3 times because I messed up. But this album predates Quiet Riot's Mental Health by a few months, and for me, this is like sort of sets the template for what would come through the rest of the 80s with sort of the MTV hard rock and heavy metal sounds. So it's a cool album. It's a fun album. If you haven't listened to it a while and you've been scared to sort of break it out again because you're like, man, I don't ever need to hear Rock Till You Drop or Photograph ever again. Give it a listen because some of these deeper cuts are really, really cool. Stage Fright, Too Late for Love, that might be my favorite. Like a deep cut on here. Die Hard, The Hunter, some really cool like metal type riffing type stuff. And unfortunately, after this, Hysteria, I think most people know the story. It took them like forever then between this album and Hysteria, tragedies within the band. And unfortunately, Hysteria, Mutt Lange and the whole band would just go a bridge too far for me with the production. And it really just got way too... It sucked all the life out of the band. They were on the verge of sucking the life out of the band here. It still works here. There's still a lot of energy. There's still a lot of rocking and, kind of fist in the air, bang your head, sing along type of stuff. But man, on Hysteria, it just got way too robotic. And it sounds like they were doing everything they could at that time to make it sound like it was recorded on a computer. This is Hysteria. Even though computers weren't being used quite yet the way they are today, Hysteria sounds like it was done on a computer and edited and straightened out and everything. And Hysteria just sucked all the life out of them. And it's a shame because to me, this was obviously a really big hit for them. Who am I to argue Hysteria went on to just be absolutely massive and even bigger album than this? But to me, this is a real sweet spot. It still rocks. It's very melodic. It's very well produced, very radio friendly, but it's still got riffs and it's still got some fist in the air choruses and fun stuff on it. So for me, really the last Def Leppard album that I really, really liked. So, all right, there you go. Let me know what you think of Pyromania. If you haven't listened to it in a while, give it another listen. Let me know what you think of it in the comments, and let me know what you think about where it sits. I was kind of surprised. I was thinking this was a little bit later. I was thinking it was like 84, 85 even. I was surprised at how early this was. And like I said, it sort of predates a lot of what was to come in the 80s. So let me know what you think in the comments. Make sure you hit like and subscribe and rock till you drop.